Hello, and good morning. Thank you for joining us and taking part in today's program. I'm Nick Potter, Director of Community Relations and Development for the Pueblo City County Library District. Welcome to this very special program where we host Martin Luther King III and welcome him to our community. It is my pleasure to welcome you as we broadcast live from the Robert Hoag Rawlings Public Library and host you virtually today. For this program, we designed a virtual event that should be simple to access and easy to interact with. Throughout the program, please feel free to comment or add questions. Your questions and comments will be shared at the end of this program with Mr. King, where he'll have time to share his thoughts and answers to the submissions. Please, don't be shy. This is a wonderful opportunity for members of our community. And if you don't want to miss a great opportunity to ask Mr. King a question. Today we will celebrate the civil rights movement, lifelong learning, and community impact. A special film series and today's featured guest are a collection of virtual programs that comprise our Community Voices series. In addition to this program, we will release videos that tell the stories of African American community members throughout our community's history. Join us every week after this program to hear stories of notable Pueblo figures like Auntie Eliza Boone, Kathy Williams, Pueblo's first African American doctors, and more. To view all programs, make sure that you follow the Pueblo City County Library District's Facebook and YouTube pages. This event is being broadcast to several schools throughout Pueblo. I want to make sure to give a warm welcome to the students joining us from South Mesa Elementary, St. Therese Catholic School, Prairie Winds Elementary, Rye Elementary, Liberty Point International, Cesar Chavez, Franklin Elementary, Columbian Elementary, Minnequaw Elementary, Swallows Charter Academy, Avondale Elementary, Sierra Vista, Cedar Ridge, Parkview Elementary, and North Mesa Elementary. This program is also being broadcast to the larger Pueblo community. I want to welcome each of you here this morning and thank you for joining us today. This program is possible because of library supporters and generous sponsors of our summer reading program and the Community Voices series. Allow me to thank the generous individuals and businesses that supported this program. Friends of the Pueblo Library, H.W. Houston Construction, Bank of the San Juans, All Phase Environmental Consultants, Inc., the Pueblo Mall, Turner Roofing, LLC, Parkview Health Systems, Security Service Investment Group, Office of the District Attorney, 10th Judicial District, Doctors Mark and Rico Clark, New Image Drywall, Pueblo Community Health Center, Credit Union of Colorado, Royal Electrical Services, and Wilcoxon Wealth Management. For everyone joining us virtually, can I get a warm round of applause for these businesses and individuals who made tonight's program possible? Thank you. And now for our featured presenter. As the oldest son of the late Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Mrs. Coretta Scott King, Martin Luther King III serves as an ambassador of his parents' legacy of nonviolent social change. A graduate of his father's alma mater, Morehouse College, Mr. King has devoted his life to working in the nonprofit sector to promote civil rights and global human rights, and to eradicate the triple evils of racism, militarism, and poverty. Evils that his father identified as the scourges of mankind. As a high school student, he served as a page to Senator Edward Kennedy. He continued his public service supporting social change movements through speaking engagements, public appearances, and his writings. He was later elected as a member of the Fulton County, Georgia Board of Commissioners, representing over 700,000 residents. As the elected president of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, the organization co-founded by his father, Mr. King reinvigorated the Southern Christian Leadership Conference by stabilizing the governance, programs, and development components. As founder and president of Realizing the Dream, Inc., he took his father's message to a global audience, spearheading nonviolence training in Bosnia-Herzegovina, India, Israel, Palestine, Kenya, Sri Lanka, and the United States. A former president and CEO of the Atlanta-based King Center, Mr. King remains a member of its board of directors. In addition, he serves as a board member of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, Drum Major Institute, a New York-based think tank, and the Metropolitan West Management Asset Corporation. Mr. King has also served as an election monitor and observer in South Africa, Nigeria, and Kenya. In addition, Mr. King has conducted nearly 40 poverty study tours in a groundbreaking initiative, which has sparked public debate and law enforcement advocacy on the issues of poverty. In conjunction with Ambassador Andrew Young and other partners, Mr. King co-founded Bounce TV, the first independently owned and operated TV network featuring African Americans. The network's content includes movies, sports, documentaries, and original programming. The recipient of numerous awards and honorary degrees, Martin Luther King III is a civil rights activist, global humanitarian, and political leader. The Pueblo Library provided his book, My Daddy, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., to many school classrooms throughout the Pueblo community. We are pleased to virtually host Mr. King and look forward to hearing from him and receiving insights into his life experiences, personal philosophies, and literature. Mr. King, thank you so much for joining us this evening. I'm so excited to hear from you and hear your insights on your book, My Daddy, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and discuss civil rights in your father's era, as well as the issues we face currently. Viewers, again, remember, you can add your questions in the dialog box below the video. I would now like to pass the virtual microphone over to Mr. Martin Luther King III.
Thank you, Nick Potter, for the very warm introduction. And I thank the library administration for inviting me to address this forum. Many thanks also to the library supporters and donors and everyone who is participating in the virtual series on community voices, but especially those of you who are students at the schools in Pueblo, because there's nothing more important in my judgment, or at least a nation is judged by how it treats its most precious resource. And there is no more important resource than you, the children of our nation. So I'm honored to have this opportunity to speak to the community, to the library system, and particularly the young people of Pueblo. In preparing my address for this forum, I learned about the remarkable diversity of Pueblo, which has been called the melting pot of the West. But the melting pot image can be misleading at times. Although there's a lot of blending of races and cultures in America, people are rightfully proud of their ancestral heritage and more frequently try to preserve the best traditions of their respective cultures. So I would suggest that America, and Pueblo included, is more of a mosaic than a melting pot. All the different tribes of America can preserve their heritage, even as we explore ways of working together for the great mosaic of American society. So the quilt image also works well. A beautiful quilt is composed of many vibrant subsections. The ideal quilt as a whole celebrates diversity, but covers and protects us all. That's why it should be in a great democracy that respects human rights for all people. And so Pueblo's vibrant multiracial heritage provides an inspiring legacy of hope and opportunity for people of different races, religions, and cultures. As an African American, I particularly enjoyed learning about the Black history of Pueblo, including the role of historical figures like James Beckwourth, a Buffalo soldier who was a co-founder of Pueblo, and Cathay Williams, another Buffalo soldier who posed as a man to help defeat slavery during the Civil War. One of the wonderful things about the westward migration of people of different races and cultures, backgrounds, is how they learned to work together for the mutual benefit of all. Cooperation became an imperative for survival. The westward migration was about new beginnings and opportunities, but it was also about learning to live together, work together, and build together. After the Civil War, the emancipation of slaves, and Juneteenth, the anniversary of which is now commemorated as a federal holiday, African Americans moved west in ever increasing numbers. Now, you wouldn't know that from watching most American movies about the West, but there were plenty of African American cowboys and cowgirls in the real history of the West. And today, Black Americans are an important constituency in the major Western cities. I also have some Native American heritage in my own family on my mother's side. It's important to acknowledge the Native tribes because they were cheated out of their ancestral lands by a long trail of broken treaties. And they too experienced horrific brutality during the westward migration. And the Asian peoples who helped build the railroads and populate the West were also brutally exploited and subjected to violence and discrimination. Spanish-speaking people who have played such a prominent role in the culture of the West have experienced ruthless exploitation as part of the settling of the West. Many history books tend to glorify the westward migration without acknowledging the violence, injustice, and brutality that was part of it. We can't deny the painful truths of history, but we're nevertheless challenged to find creative ways to work together and to live as brothers and sisters and children of our common Creator. Despite the inevitable differences that emerge between people of different cultures, it's encouraging that the people of Pueblo are finding new ways to build bridges of mutual understanding and cooperation for the betterment of the entire community. Black history has long been an interest of mine, as you might imagine. Growing up as the namesake and son of Martin Luther King Jr. certainly presented its own set of unique challenges, but also benefits. On the one hand, people are kind and generous when I meet them. On the other hand, they understandably have high expectations, which are often very difficult to meet. Now, my father was assassinated when I was just 10 years old. And that probably has been the hardest part of his legacy. Because he wasn't just a famous leader to me. He was a warm, caring, loving father, a real dad whose company was tremendously enjoyable and who is sorely missed, particularly when he had to travel often during those years. He had a great sense of humor, and he was fun to hang out with. You know, my mother prepared me as best she could for the kind of life I would be leading as my father's namesake. She always emphasized that I was free to make different choices and be as private as a person as I wanted to. And I'm really so thankful for that liberation. She used to say, Martin, You don't have to be like your father. You don't have to go to Morehouse College, although I did. You don't have to become a minister. I haven't been called to the ministry. You don't have to be a civil rights leader, although I have been involved in civil and human rights. But just be your best self, and we will do all that we can to support you. And so I'm so thankful for that liberation, because if I woke up every day trying to be Martin Luther King Jr., I would fail miserably. But I was thankful that my mother gave me that liberation to be the best Martin that I could be. The primary reason my mother worked so hard to secure the enactment of the Martin Luther King Jr. holiday is that she knew it would lead to millions of people studying about the philosophy and methods of nonviolence. She believed, as did my father, that nonviolence is the most powerful tool available to oppress people in their struggles for liberation. The challenge facing everyone who believes in the dream is to spread his teachings about nonviolence worldwide. Here's what my father wrote about my mother's influence on his leadership, and I quote, "She saw the greatness of the movement and had a unique willingness to sacrifice herself for its continuation. If I have done anything in the struggle, it's because I had behind me and at my side a devoted, understanding, dedicated, and patient champion in the person of my wife. I am convinced that if I had not had a wife with the formidable strength and calmness of Corey, I could not have withstood the ordeals and tensions surrounding the movement." Educating people about my father's philosophy and strategy of nonviolence has also been a top priority in my life, as well as for my siblings. My dad sometimes took me and my younger brother and older sister with him on civil rights movement trips so that we could see with our own eyes what he was doing to make life better for our generation. We came to understand the burdens of his leadership, and we all chose to get involved in making our contribution to carrying forward his unfinished work. And today I try to do my part as the father of a daughter, Yolanda Renee King. Like my father and mother before me, my wife and partner, Andre, and I make every effort to include our daughter in the projects we undertook today and even on a consistent basis. In fact, our daughter, Yolanda, just traveled with us to Washington back in August 28th, for the 58th anniversary of the March on Washington, where my father delivered his I Have a Dream speech. Yolanda was one of the speakers at 13 years old, along with my wife, Andre, and myself. And over the years, when she was a very, very young child, maybe as early as 1 or 2 years old, we began reading to her every night. And as a result, she is a voracious reader on her own, much like her grandfather. And we are making sure she understands the value and importance of libraries. Nowadays, we sometimes hear people say that libraries are obsolete because the internet can provide nearly all of the books and magazines that one needs, and they can find them all in one place. But I don't necessarily embrace that. You see, libraries are much, much more, and are about more than storage spaces for books. They really are community learning centers, places where people can gather and share valuable information and educate each other. As the librarian R. David Lankeys once said, "Bad libraries build collections, good libraries build services, and great libraries build communities." And so it is my hope that the Patrick A. Lucerio Library will continue to serve as a gathering place for interracial friendship and unity for the people of Pueblo. Let it become a matrix for a community of caring and compassion for each other and all who pass through here. I'm not knocking the internet as a learning tool. On the contrary, it is an essential tool for learning and keeping informed in today's society. But there's an old saying that Google can quickly bring you 100,000 answers to your question, but a good librarian can give you the right one. Today's best libraries also provide computer access for kids who might otherwise not be able to do research online because of their family's economic circumstances. For many young people, libraries are a refuge, a place where they can find some peace and quiet, with no television blaring in the background. A safe place where they can read and think about what they are reading without a lot of distracting noises. It's also a wonderful asset for students who need some guidance to fulfill their potential. With so many bookstores disappearing from America's cities and towns, it's good that the simple pleasure of browsing among books and reading to follow your curiosity is still very much alive in our community libraries. The young adult novelist Liba Bray wrote that the library card is a passport to wonders and miracles, glimpses into other lives, religions, experiences, the hopes and dreams and strivings of all human beings. And it is this passport that opens our eyes and hearts to the world beyond our front doors. That is one of our best hopes against tyranny, xenophobia, homelessness, despair, anarchy, and ignorance. My father loved libraries. In fact, he had one in our home, and we called it the study. But really, it was a library with an amazing variety of books crowding the shelves. My dad was definitely a bookworm. There's a famous photo of him walking down the aisle in an airplane, and he's carrying 3 books for reading on the flight. The New Industrial State by John Kenneth Galbraith, The Confessions of Nat Turner by William Staffron, and the Holy Bible. There's another photo of Dad that I like, and that is of him sitting in his library reading a book called The Gandhi Reader. He read everything he could find about Gandhi. In my father's first book, Stride Toward Freedom, he wrote that the day he began reading about Gandhi was one of the transformative days of his life. The day he began to envision a practical philosophy that could bring an end to the Jim Crow era. Yes, reading can indeed be revolutionary. I would like to suggest that it would be a great service if some space in your library could be set aside for educating people about the life, works, and teachings of Martin Luther King Jr., as well as Mahatma Gandhi, and of course, the late great Cesar Chavez. In addition to the 14-volume Martin Luther King Jr.'s papers and the 7 books that my father wrote, it would be good to have some copies of the DVD entitled King, a filmed record from Memphis to Montgomery, or from Montgomery to Memphis, which is the best documentary yet made about my father and the movement. This is the documentary that presents over 3 hours of footage of the American modern civil rights movement in action. There's nothing else like it. Just an extraordinary teaching tool. I would also recommend the DVD Martin Luther King Jr. Man of Peace in a Time of War, which includes an in-depth interview with my father, videotaped in high quality color, which was rare for the era. No doubt, there are many other news sources worth acquiring. And certainly, you want a good collection of children's books that touch on his legacy. Since 1970, the American Library Association has presented an annual Coretta Scott King Award recognizing outstanding children's books by African American authors and illustrators. And I'm sure I will mention, although it's already been mentioned, some of you do have it. My publisher would certainly want me to mention, my publisher, HarperCollins, my own children's book entitled My Daddy, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Let it also include ever-increasing resources to educate each new generation about the power of nonviolence to end injustice and bring people together and build brotherhood and sisterhood. To the students and young people who are taking part in this forum, I encourage you to learn more about the modern American civil rights movement. Students and young people played such an important role in the civil rights movement, particularly in Birmingham, Alabama in 1963. When my father led citywide protest against racial segregation in public accommodations, more than 3,000 young people, some of who were elementary school students, filled the jails to protest against the injustices of racial discrimination. I want you to hear that, young people, again. More than 3,000 young people, many of them students at the elementary, middle levels, and high school, filled the jails back in 1963 to desegregate communities. Throughout the American civil rights movement, many young people who were not old enough to vote or even to register, much of the freedom African Americans have achieved in the U.S. so far comes from the dedication of young people, students, and young workers of all races. In fact, we saw thousands and thousands of young people marching last year after the tragic death of George Floyd. And so it's important to think of yourselves as potential heroes and sheroes. Yes, we have a lot of work to do in meeting this challenge. I sometimes hear people complaining about how they don't make leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. anymore. Instead, we want to become leaders. We want you to become leaders yourselves. History is calling your generation to lead the way forward to a better world. My father was once a young person with many of the same dreams and insecurities some young people have today. But he worked hard and prepared himself in a way that he was able to answer when history called. And that's what today's young people must do if we want to create a better world. Let all of us, black, white, red, brown, and yellow, join together, and also of every religious creed and nation, join together with love and courage to make Martin Luther King Jr.'s dream a beautiful reality. My young friends, you, the young people of the 21st century, must lead our world to a new era of peace and prosperity. I know that seems like a great challenge, but remember that every one of you can be great because all of you can be servants of God and justice and peace. We're counting on you to pick up the torch of leadership and help to put an end to poverty, racism, war, and violence. With your help and with prayers and God's blessings, we can fulfill Martin Luther King Jr.'s dream of a new world where freedom and justice and peace will reign supreme among all people. I urge all of you to become servants of your community, nation, and world. Make a personal commitment to give something of yourself to help somebody or some great cause. You can become a force for constructive social change. Every act of service to help someone, no matter how small, will make you a more fulfilled person. It will make you your community and nation better, and will create a better world for all of humanity. My young friends, our world is crying out to your generation to challenge the injustices that afflict humankind. I urge you to make your unique contributions to creating a better world where every person has a decent home, nourishment, the best quality of education, and good health care. And are secured. That should be secured for every person. Your generation must lead the way to a new day when all communities are free from poverty, injustice, and violence. Reach out and help one another to achieve your full potential as human beings. Resolve to blaze new trails of liberation and winning new victories for freedom and human dignity for oppressed people. Pick up the torch of leadership and light the way forward to a new era of hope and healing with peace, liberty, and justice for all people. These are great challenges, but you must have faith in yourself and your potential greatness as servants of God and humanity. Each and every one of you can be a leader in your home, community, nation, and world. Your generation can lead us to a beautiful new day when we can end racism and all forms of prejudice and bigotry. A new day when we can eradicate poverty, eliminate violence and war. With your leadership and commitment, we can create a worldwide beloved community in which all people can live together in peace, love, and natural harmony, as our Creator intended. In this way, the young people of Pueblo can promote the values of love and nonviolence and the principles of justice and equality for people of all races, religions, and cultures. Now, my father not only gave us a great dream for America, a vision of a nation united in justice, equality, brotherhood, and sisterhood, he told us and showed us how to achieve it through nonviolence. This is the legacy we must pass on to all future generations. My father's I Have a Dream speech, he challenged all of us to live together as sisters and brothers in the human family. On many occasions, he used the term the beloved community to describe the kind of society he envisioned for America, in which every person was valued and where all conflicts could be reconciled peacefully in a spirit of goodwill and mutual benefit. It is a daunting challenge. Some would call it a utopian ideal, but a great nation should have great dreams and great goals. In meeting this challenge, America's wonderful diversity presents both our greatest strength and our most difficult problem. The diverse peoples who came to these shores from Africa, Asia, Latin America, and Europe, and the indigenous people of our hemisphere have all made remarkable contributions to the betterment of our society. Indeed, the people of every race can point to a litany of accomplishments that have made America the hope of humanity. And yet, there is an urgent need for improvement in the way our diverse communities interact for the betterment of our country. We must do a better job of reducing conflict between different social groups so we can lay the foundation for a new era of understanding, goodwill, and cooperation that can move America forward. Like my father, I believe that nonviolence provides the strategy we can leverage to weave together an American mosaic that can help our country live up to its best ideals. Nonviolence was the key to all of the victories of the modern American civil rights movement. Everything that my father achieved as a civil rights leader, he credited to the unique power of nonviolence. And in less than 13 years, the nonviolent civil rights movement won landmark reforms, including the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, Fair Housing legislation of 1968. Nonviolence succeeds because it earns the respect of the community. When oppressed people refuse to retaliate with violence while resisting injustice with peaceful protest and tactics, they set a powerful example and gain credibility. What is amazing as we look back on this period of history is the nonviolent discipline the movement embraced. Even though more than 36 civil rights workers were killed during the civil rights movement, no civil rights activist engaged in violence during this era. And so I encourage people everywhere to study nonviolence, to make it a cornerstone principle of social activism, and then get engaged in organized nonviolent action for needed reforms. But nonviolence is not just about protest, civil disobedience, and boycotts. It's also a way diverse people can live together for mutual benefit. My father once said that we have to be together before we can learn to live together. Regretfully, today, millions of Americans rarely have any meaningful contact with someone of another race. To many of the nation's neighborhoods and communities are still racially segregated. Many of them still are. We can't just talk about good race relations in the abstract and realistically expect that peaceful coexistence will somehow become a reality. Sometimes it really does take a real effort to reach out beyond our comfort zones, to engage with someone from a different community. But it's an effort worth making because it broadens our horizons, increases mutual understanding, and provides practical experience in multicultural living. And in that spirit, I encourage all Americans to broaden our circle of friendships to include people of another race or culture. We can certainly enjoy our respective communities and still reach out to build friendship and bonds of goodwill with Americans of different races, religions, and cultures. And imagine what such a commitment on the part of millions of Americans would do for our country just after 5 years. With your support, we can turn this beautiful vision of hope and opportunity into a reality. We can create the kind of society that nurtures the bodies, minds, and spirits of all of our people. When my father received the Nobel Prize in 1964, he said, "I have the audacity to believe that peoples everywhere can have 3 meals a day for their bodies, education and culture for their minds, and dignity, equality, and freedom for their spirits." This was his dream and his vision of the beloved community, not just for America, but for the entire world. Let this be our vision going forward as we strive to be better servants of God and humanity. So in closing, I would just thank all of you for coming and having the opportunity today to listen as I've tried to share. And as we move forward into the future, united and determined to create the beloved community of his great dream in America and throughout the world, we need everyone's engagement. There's not one of us who can work to achieve this alone. It is a collective group of us working to create a harmonious society. And to reach, sometimes we have to reach for the stars. But it only takes a few good women and men, my dad and mom taught me, to bring about change. In fact, I traveled many times with my mom after my dad was killed over the years. And one of those occasions, I had an opportunity to go to the undergraduate college where she attended. which the name of that college is Antioch College in Yellow Springs, Ohio. I attended I must have visited that college at least 8 or 10 times over the years. The very first time I remember going there, I saw a statue of the educator Horace Mann on the campus. And on that statue was an inscription that made an indelible impact on my life that I will always remember. What the words said were, "Be ashamed to die until you've won a victory for humanity." And at 13 years old, I thought about those words, and I thought about how profound they were. And I thought, well, how can you actually do that? And then over the years, I began to break down what those words meant. You see, we can win a victory in our neighborhood. We can win victories in our schools. We can win victories in our places of worship. Some of us may win victories in our towns or our cities. Some may win victories in our states. Some may win victories in our nation. And some may even win victories for our world. But all those words basically mean are, be ashamed to die until you've done a little something to make the world in which we all must live a little better than it was when you arrived. Thank you, and may God continue to bless the entire Pueblo community, the entire state of Colorado, and the entire nation of the United States of America, and also the entire world.
Mr. King, thank you so much for speaking to our community today. We've received several comments and questions. The first one I want to read, I think, is just really speaking to our appreciation as a community, and it comes from a viewer named Jimmy Duffner. And he says, "Thank you very much, Mr. King, for addressing us this morning. As a member of the Poor People's Campaign, I am so thankful to you and your father and his dedication to nonviolent civil rights and his involvement with the campaign. Peace, love, and harmony to you."
Thank you.
And then our next one comes from an educator named Celestina Artiega. And Celestina says, "Hello from Avondale Elementary School. Our students have thought of a few questions. They would like to know, where did you travel with your father? Where did you travel with your father and have the best memory? How can we help as young kids? And what is your favorite book? And also, we appreciate you and the work of your father and mother."
Okay, very good. Let me try to succinctly answer all of those things. I should have written them all 4 down. I think there were 4 questions, but let me start by saying I traveled with my father to St. Augustine, Florida in the early 60s, probably around 1964. St. Augustine was a city where there was a lot of racism, like many other cities in the South in the 60s. And in the public swimming pool, for example, blacks would go swimming and the community would pour acid or lye in the pool to keep blacks from swimming. People were arrested, people were beaten. And although I was there with my father, I felt very safe. I was alone. My siblings were not with me on that trip. My brother and I traveled with him to Cleveland, Ohio, where he was involved in a civil rights demonstration, and I got to see him speak on all of these occasions. We traveled to him to Mississippi, where he actually led marches. There was an African-American man by the name of James Meredith in the mid-60s who was shot, not killed, fortunately. He was shot and actually lived. In fact, I think he may still be living. But he was the first black man to integrate Ole Miss, or the University of Mississippi. And we went to that march, the Meredith March, and several others. Those are just some of the places where I traveled. We traveled maybe 3 or 4 cities with my dad, and I have to think more about where they were. Those are the ones that come to mind right now. Second part of the question, I think, was what can you as young people do? First of all, I want to encourage each of you to realize that there's almost nothing that you cannot achieve if you choose to. And it's so important to prepare yourselves. We used to, when I was growing up, they used to say, my teachers used to say, you know, you need to master, they'd say the 3 R's, and all of these words are not spelled with R's, but we kind of, you know, we thought that at the time. Those 3 R's they referred to were reading, writing, and arithmetic. So in other words, if you master reading, if you master writing, if you master arithmetic, there's almost nothing you cannot do. Today, we sometimes master R's, but we master the R's of running and rapping and rhyming. And while it's fine or cool to run, rap, and rhyme, we must have the reading, writing, and arithmetic to complement and to make sure our foundation is intact. So I want to first urge you to always do that which you want to do. But if you want to help society, there are all kinds of ways that you can do that. Right now, we're trying to expand voting rights in our nation. And that's why I was in Washington just a couple of days ago, trying to meet with our senators and congresspersons to make sure that there's federal voting rights legislation, because some of our elected officials are trying to reduce the opportunity for people to vote. I know you as young people cannot vote at this point. You will be able to once you turn 18. But you certainly can still write or email or tweet or text the senators and congresspeople and let them know that you're concerned about the right to vote. And although you can't vote, you want to make sure everyone's right is protected and preserved. So I would encourage you, as I said, to communicate with our elected officials, even as children, because there are issues that impact you in the schools. What kind of curriculum books that you're going to have? Of course, that's the school board locally. But all the issues that will affect you in your life, what you do in the future, elected officials make those decisions. So I hope that you will be engaged. I hope that maybe one day some of you may be involved in publicly demonstrating by going to marches. You don't have to march. That's just one of the steps that can be taken. That's one of the steps that we used in the modern civil rights movement. My father used. We had a big march on August 28th of this year, just a few last month. Which was the 58th anniversary of the March on Washington, where over 50,000 people, many of them children, came to Washington or were in Washington, and we were marching about voting rights. But there are many other issues, and there are many other ways that you can be activists. And then if you're an artist, if you draw or if you perform, you can use your platform as an artist as you build a social media platform to encourage others to be engaged. If you're a photographer, you can take pictures. So there are all kinds of things that you as young people can do to be engaged in making the world better. Because the goal, in my judgment, should be to make the world better for all of God's children. It is not about, it's not necessarily about going backward. It's about how do we go forward and make the world better for all. Some of you will become doctors. Some of you will become lawyers. Some of you will become teachers. Some of you may become athletes or entertainers. But whatever you do, just do the best you can. My dad used to say, if it falls your lot to be a street sweeper, go on and sweep streets like Michelangelo carved marble, sweep streets like Beethoven composed music, sweep streets like Shakespeare wrote poetry, sweep streets like Raphael painted pictures, sweep streets so well that all the host of the heavens and earth would have to pause and say, here lived a great street sweeper that did his job well, and so well that no one else could do it any better. Douglas Malloch, the historian, used to say that in life we got to find out what it is that we want to be, and we must work to become what it is. So all I'm saying is you as young people must decide you're going to be the best of what you are, and the opportunities are unlimited. You know, all kinds of things we can do. I know there was one more question, but it slips my mind now. So
I'll fit it into this question because they actually work really well together. So we received another question from Bianca Flores, and her question is, how does the children's book that you wrote, My Daddy, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., relate to Pueblo's youth of today? And the third part of the previous question was just asking what your favorite book was.
Oh, that's right. Okay. My favorite book first is a book called Jonathan Livingston's Seagull. And unfortunately, the author slips my mind, but it's about this bird that flies higher than any of the other birds and has a certain perspective about life. And it was one of my favorite books. When I was a kid, I was presented, but it's called Jonathan Livingston Seagull. And as I said, the author slips my mind right this moment, but that title you could remember. Now, in relationship to my own book, my daddy, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., there are many examples of stories that I was inspired by. I want to give you one or two that are in the book, because I was raised in a home that taught nonviolence. When I was maybe in about the third grade, I was at a school. We were the first Black children to try to integrate the school. And my brother and my sister and we went to that school. My younger sister was too young, I guess, so she did not go at that time. But at that school, I had a friend, and he was not initially my friend. He was a kid who often called me the N-word, and he called Black children, period. And he was always angry. So one day I went and started talking to him, and he was drawing. He was a very talented artist. And I said to him, "What is that?" I knew what it was. It was a battleship. And he said, "Battleship." I said, "Hey, man, that's really good." And he looked up at me and he said, "You think so?" I said, "Yeah, man, you're very talented." Now, his relationship and the negative energy that he used to use to refer to me as the N-word, that changed over time. It was almost like we really became closer friends. But he was taught that language in his home, apparently, because children don't come in the world harboring hatred. But I used a method of nonviolence that I was exposed to subconsciously as a child by getting him and making him a friend and complimenting him. Apparently, he didn't get many compliments in his home. Another example, when we were children, someone gave us toy guns. And when I was growing up, we didn't have as much information as we have today about ecology and the environment. So we had metal trash cans in the back of our homes, and we could take our trash out and burn it in our backyard. And so, as I said, we didn't understand pollution back then as we do today, and how that there are better ways to dispose of trash as we have today. But someone gave us these guns, these cap guns, and my father, being a strong proponent of nonviolence and mother, he didn't tell us what to do. We played with those guns for a little while, but then we took them to the backyard and later on burned that gift up, because we felt that was not a nonviolent way for us to proceed. So they're small examples that are provided in the book. Another example, I was confronted by some white kids when I was at that school, and they asked me in a very nasty way. And they were bigger than me. They seemed like they were larger than I was at the time. It was second or third grade, and they said, "What's your name?" And this is kind of funny. So my defense mechanism kind of kicked in. Instead of saying, "Well, I'm Martin Luther King III," I said, I don't know my name," because I was afraid that if I said who I was, that they were going to jump on me and beat me up. So I had to use all kind of things throughout my life to really learn how to navigate through different sets of circumstances, but always held on to the concept of nonviolence. So I think the book provides certain examples in a very simplistic way of the kind of things we can do and what some of the lessons that I learned from my father.
So, Mr. King, we have two more questions. And the first one, I'm hoping that you get kind of a kick out of, because I think it's pretty interesting and really talks to the students that are enjoying your program right now. And so the question is, last month, the video game Fortnite partnered with Time Magazine to bring Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. into the game to create an immersive experience so gamers have the ability to virtually travel back in time in 1963 and witness Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech. This is an innovative approach to bring the impact of historical events to children and adult gamers. Can you give your thoughts on this offering and this new way of approaching impactful historical events?
I appreciate that question. I think that while the gaming industry, and there's a lot of violence associated with that particular game, I think that we must reach out as significantly as we can and through as many modalities as we can to actually reach young people. And that is one of the modalities that, there are millions of young people who may not ever be exposed, but through that modality. And so I would have to say, and I think you have to continue to adjust and to make new provisions for how you do it so that it is not an insulting kind of scenario, because from my understanding, I was not familiar with the game, quite frankly. I am familiar with the fact that the I Have a Dream experience is, imported into it. But again, I think if we can get people, no matter who they are, to listen, it could transform lives in a positive way. So I think that's the good part of it. I think we have to continue to tweak how you do that through these technologies so that it is not received in a disrespectful way, but it actually is heard. Because here's what I say about I Have a Dream. This came to me, someone shared it the other day. We listen with our ears, but we hear with our heart. So I've listened to the I Have a Dream speech thousands of times, but it is only when I hear it that I am impacted emotionally and impacted to move to action. So hopefully people are not just listening, but are hearing that speech, and maybe we'll be in a position to do something positive in our nation and world.
Well, thank you for that. We have one final question that comes from Mrs. Weaver's third grade classroom in the Villa Bella Expeditionary School. And as a class, they want to say, thank you so much for your time. And they want to know.
Nick, I think you're frozen. I didn't hear you because you were frozen. I didn't hear the question.
Uh-oh.
Nick, hello?
Sorry about that. Can you hear me?
Now I can hear you. Didn't hear the question.
Okay,
go ahead.
All right. Okay, so the question comes from Mrs. Weaver's third grade classroom from the Villa Bella Expeditionary School. And their question is first started off with, they wanted to say, thank you so much for your time. But they wanted to know, what do you think is the biggest learning challenge for children today?
Wow, that's a great question. I think one of the biggest learning challenges might be in other words, I think we have to really teach how to think. And oftentimes our schools traditionally think you how to memorize information to take an exam. And that's okay, but thinking is so profound and important. So if we can teach our children in a foundation how to think, then they can make their own decisions and not be programmed. The goal is not to be programmed. Oftentimes we are programmed as opposed to being able to evaluate, wow, this is something that makes sense, is good, is just, is right. Let's embrace it. But we are taught all kinds of information. Even sometimes what our parents teach us. So it may be good, but then it may not be. It's what their parents taught them. So generationally, we're taught, and we're taught in a limited way. At some point, we have to take off the barriers and open up and be able to look and see. and then to be able to think and evaluate. So I would think that the biggest inhibitors may be how we structure. It's a complicated, there's not an easy answer. This is a very complicated question. And at the end of the day, mine is just an opinion, just like in the fact of the matter is everyone has one. So I only have an opinion. I would like to see us more broad in our thinking as we expand. Today, we're trying to restrict things and keep people in boxes. And you really should, we will never become what we ought to become if we are structured in a box. So let's take the goggles off. Let's take the blinders off. Let's be able to independently think and evaluate, and so that we have a limitless ability to imagine anything. That song of John Lennon, Imagine. If we can imagine the kind of world that peace exists, we can create it. If we can live a day in peace, maybe we can live a week in peace. If we can live a week in peace, maybe we can live a month in peace. If we can live a month in peace, maybe we can live a year of peace. And if we can achieve a year of peace, then maybe we can achieve a lifetime of peace.
Mr. King, thank you so much for joining us. It was a privilege. It was just a privilege to host you today and also last night, and to hear your inspirational words.
Thank you so much for the opportunity, and may God bless all of you, the whole community. And I hope hopefully in the near future, I think I've been to Pueblo once, I think. Mm-hmm. And I will look forward to coming back at some point.
We would love to host you again. Just let us know when you're in town.
All righty. Very good. Thank you so much.
And to all of the community and all of the school children that this is streaming into your classrooms, I really hope that this is something that you remember and that you cherish for the rest of your life. Having someone of the esteem of Martin Luther King III to address all members of our community is such an opportunity for us. It's such a privilege. So thank you so much for participating in this and joining us today. I hope that you left here feeling inspired and ready to change the world for the better. Have a great day. And now go out, change the world, and make it a better place. Thank you. Cool.